Hello and welcome back to Outside Views. Today we're going to talk about 3 key reasons why leaving the EU has made the British poorer. Because 5 years after Brexit, the economic damage is undeniable. The promises of prosperity, independence and control have not materialized. Instead, we have seen a steady decline in trade, increased bureaucratic burdens and rising costs for businesses and consumers alike. But let's start with the first reason, the impact on trade. Brexit was supposed to free Britain to strike its own trade deals and open up new global markets. The idea was that by leaving the EU, Britain would become a powerhouse in global trade, unshackled by EU regulations and able to negotiate its own agreements on better terms. But the reality is very different. Since Brexit, British exports have suffered badly. Multiple studies indicate that UK goods exports are about 30% lower than they would have been if the UK had remained in the EU. Even the most conservative estimates put this decline at around 6%. And this is a huge economic loss. The Independent Office for Budget Responsibility predicts that in the long term, Brexit will reduce the UK's exports and imports by 15%. And overall, it will shrink the UK economy by 4% in the coming years. And the so-called big new trade deals have been underwhelming. The agreement with Australia, for example, was widely criticized for benefiting Australian farmers while offering little to British producers. And the much-hyped trade agreement with New Zealand was even smaller in scale. And meanwhile, UK businesses trading with the EU now face mountains of additional paperwork, customs declarations and compliance checks. Small and medium-sized enterprises in particular have been hit hard. For many of them, the added costs and delays have made EU trade unviable, forcing thousands of businesses to stop exporting to the continent altogether. I told you the number in my last video. The additional bureaucracy has also driven up costs for consumers. Food prices, for instance, have risen as a direct result of Brexit. Importing goods from the EU has become more expensive and, of course, more complicated. And this means higher prices on supermarket shelves, and British households are paying this price. So much for the claim that Brexit would lower costs and boost trade. And now let's talk about the second reason, the impact on migration. Immigration was a central issue in the Brexit debate, and many Brexit supporters believed that leaving the EU would allow Britain to take back control of its borders and reduce migration levels. I talked about this at noon today. But the actual outcome has been quite different. Since Brexit, net migration has reached record highs. And while migration from the EU has declined, migration from non-EU countries has increased dramatically. As I said before, in the 12 months leading up to mid-2023, net migration was over 900,000, and that's far higher than the pre-Brexit levels. And this is Britain now operates a point-based immigration system that prioritizes certain job sectors. Many key industries, such as healthcare and social care, are more reliant than ever on foreign workers. Instead of welcoming European workers under the freedom of movement rules, the UK is now bringing in more workers from countries like India, Nigeria, and the Philippines. And this shift has created even more administrative burdens. British businesses now have to deal with complex visa processes to hire foreign workers, making it harder to fill vacancies. And even the National Health Service, the NHS, is feeling the effects. Despite hiring thousands of new healthcare workers, the number of EU nationals working in the NHS has actually fallen compared to 2019. And instead of making migration smoother and more controlled, Brexit has made it more complicated and expensive for businesses and public services alike. And the third reason is travel restrictions and the loss of EU benefits. One of the most overlooked impacts of Brexit has been the restrictions placed on British citizens when travelling or working in the EU. Before Brexit, UK citizens had the freedom to live, work and study anywhere in the EU without a visa. That freedom is gone. Since the Brexit transition ended, UK citizens can now only stay in the EU for 90 days within a 180-day period without a visa. For anyone looking to work or study in Europe, the process has become significantly more difficult. And starting from April this year, EU citizens traveling to the UK will also need a new electronic travel authorization, or ETA. While this might seem like a small bureaucratic change, it is another sign of how Brexit has created more red tape rather than reducing it. Tourism and business travel have also suffered. British musicians, artists, and professionals who used to travel freely across Europe now face expensive visa applications and work permits. And this has hurt the UK's creative industries and made it harder for British professionals to compete internationally. So let's recap a little. Brexit has made the British poorer in three key ways. First, by damaging trade and increasing costs for businesses and consumers. Second, by complicating migration policies and creating new burdens on businesses and public services. And third, by restricting travel and removing the freedoms that UK citizens once enjoyed within the EU. 5 years on, the promises of Brexit have not been fulfilled. Instead of greater prosperity, Britain has seen stagnation, rising costs, and reduced international influence. And the question remains, how much longer will Britain continue down this path before real change happens? Thanks for watching Outside Views, and if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below the video. See you next time, and the next video is right here in the end screen.